Funding for this program is brought to you by Bismarck Big Boy. From pizza burgers flying style to fast and delicious fried chicken, Bismarck Big Boy has been a local legend since 1954.
There's an account written in a article from Boston, actually, and a saloon owner ended up getting shot, and they had the funeral for him in what was then the Boot Hill Cemetery, where the governor's mansion is currently located. And Tom Fortune and some of the other city leaders had the funeral for him, and they buried him standing up.
Tom Fortune came to Bismarck in 1872 from Ireland and worked on the construction of the Northern Pacific Railroad. He met and married his wife Bridget in 1875, and they were one of the first couples to be married at St. Mary's Catholic Church in Bismarck. Tom began his own freight business between Bismarck and South Dakota with around 15 teams of horses and mules, then became a general contractor and worked road construction as the city of Bismarck was built. He was also one of the first chiefs of police with only a bully club as a weapon.
Thomas Fortune and Bridget, there's some uncertainty about what her actual last name was. In the Bismarck Tribune, the report of them being married was in the Bismarck Tribune, and her last name there was Lanahan, but in her obituary it was Lennon. So we're not sure exactly what it was. He had several different things that he did after he got here. The railroad went broke. He stayed. Early on, he got involved in driving a stagecoach to the Black Hills during the gold rush. And they would leave from the corner of 9th and Sweet, where Zarell's jewelry is now. There was a place there with horses. And so he knew people at Fort Lincoln, and then, of course, all the way out to Deadwood. And we had some things in the family that he was given by some of the soldiers. We had some vases and things like that were very old. They're still in the family. And so there were stories about that. And then when he got married in 1875, there wasn't even a St. Mary's Church yet. The priest came to town, Father Glennon, and they had to wait till the priest came in order to be married. And so that was one of the early marriages in town, 1875. And then they had a log house on the corner of First and it was Meigs at the time, or Broadway, where the Mason apartment building is now. Thomas Fortune was instrumental in organizing a picnic, which raised $1,400, which was a big amount back in 1875 or whatever it was, that went towards the construction of the first St. Mary's Church. And that was very important to them. The Irish in those days, my mom talked about, they encountered the Irish need not apply. So there was an anti-Catholic, anti-Irish sentiment in the United States, and it was present here in early Bismarck at the beginning. And so the Irish stuck together, And one of the things about them being able to stick together was to get a Catholic church, because that was the center of their community.
Our great-grandfather, Thomas Fortune, in addition to raising the $1,400 for St. Mary's Church, he and his wife, Bridget, also donated the sanctuary light that is still lit at St. Mary's Pro-Cathedral on Broadway Avenue today.
After running the stage, there was a period of time where he was chief of police, and actually had two stints. He was chief of police, and then they had a different mayor, and then he wasn't chief, and then another election, and then he came in as chief again. And he was chief of police during the years of Bloody Fourth, and so there's accounts in the Tribune of him having to enforce the law in some difficult situations, and not only in Bismarck, but he also down at Painted Woods or Whiskey Point, whatever you want to call it, which was across from Fort Lincoln. There were some incidents down there, and so his name would pop up there. There's one story that there's an account written in a article from Boston, actually, and a saloon owner ended up getting shot, and they had the funeral for him in what was then the Boot Hill Cemetery, where the governor's mansion is currently located. And Tom Fortune and some of the other city leaders had the funeral for him, and they buried him standing up there. I think that time when he was chief of police, he made a lot of connections and things which enabled him to go into business for himself as a, probably because he drove the stage, he ended up acquiring teams of horses, and he became a early contractor in Bismarck. And he got, I think because of his time as with the police, he was able to get contracts for grading some of the streets in Bismarck, also out at the new Fort Lincoln, and other contracts and things like that. So he eventually became a very successful contractor in competition with the Wachters. So they both had lots of horses. Tom Fortune's moved up on 2nd Street, up between Avenue D and Avenue E was the Fortune house. And behind there was his horse barn. And he, about where the St. Mary's Academy, the old St. Mary's High School now, was a place where he would have his horses. And they called that hill where the water tower is Artesian Hill. There was some springs that came out there, and the water would run down. And one of the things that was in the Bismarck Tribune is very early on he built a toboggan run from the top of that hill that went all the way down Mandan Street to Broadway for the early kids one winter. They were active in the early Democratic Party in Bismarck. So there was a brother of Tom Fortune who also came to Bismarck early on, Michael. And he was the first one that had anything to do with politics. He ended up moving to Minnesota, and then we lost contact with him after that. But then the children of Thomas Fortune, there was a James Fortune, and they were active in early politics in Bismarck, Burleigh County on the Democrat side. One of Thomas Fortune's sons, George Fortune, became chief of police at one point, and it was kind of interesting. he ended up having to resign. There was a peddler who came to town, and he apparently, or was accused anyway, of shaking the peddler down and taking some of his merchandise, which was found in his home. So some rugs and things like that. So he ended up resigning, and the attorney that represented the peddler was Langer. Before he was elected or whatever, he was a practicing attorney. So that was kind of a big scandal that the family didn't always talk about, but there was a lot of coverage in the Bismarck Tribune about it.
My grandmother, Anne Weldon, came from Ireland, from Dublin, and the family that she came to live with told her, her mother-in-law, her future mother-in-law, told her that there were all sorts of job opportunities for young women in Bismarck. When Anne got here, what she found out is that Bridget had in mind that she would be a housekeeper for her. And Anne fell in love with Bridget's eldest son, Hugh, and Hugh and Anne eloped. So much for the housekeeping duties. For Bridget, anyway.
Help tell the stories of Bismarck's past and become a financial sponsor of this program. Contact info@bismarckhistory.org to learn more.
There was 5 children of Thomas and Bridget Fortune, and one of them was the girl. There's only one girl. Her name was Margaret, and they called her Ella, and she married Tim Flaherty, who was the Burleigh County auditor for many years. And that's who I'm named after, his uncle, my mom's Uncle Tim. The others all ended up leaving Bismarck, the other kids. One of Mom's brothers, John Fortune, was killed in World War II, so he was his body was never recovered, so we have a marker over in the Veterans Cemetery for him. And the rest of the Fortunes, most of them stayed here. There was a few that went other places. Well, my grandfather, Hugh Fortune, was the oldest of the Fortune children, of Tom and Bridget's children. And so I know the most about him, of course. And he took over the family business, the construction business. And so when my mother was born, she remembers they would go for several summers, they'd go to Valley City and stay in the Rudolph Hotel there. And they were building the Highliner Bridge in Valley City. And there were other road contracts, so he was mainly a road contractor. And my mom was always proud. She said he was the first mechanized road contractor in North Dakota. I don't know if that's historically accurate or not. But then during World War I, he had a contract for Highway 10, and the bid was at pre-war prices, and then just like today, there was a rapid inflation, and he ended up losing the business with that. And some of his equipment then went to Northern Improvement, the McCormick family of Fargo. And actually one of his brothers ended up working for the McCormicks at Northern Improvement for many years. So there was a connection there.
My grandfather married a German gal from Mandan, and they lived in Mandan. He worked on the Northern Pacific Railroad. He was in the yard, and he and my grandmother Lost 3 children. They're all buried over at Mandan Union Cemetery together, the 5 of them. But he had one sister who was 13 years older than he was, the 3 babies in between, and then my dad was a baby. He lost his mother when he was about 9, I believe it was. And Grandpa remarried. He married a woman, a widow, who had 8 children. So it was a little bit of a shock to him because by the time Grandpa Leonardo remarried, my dad at 9 was the only child in the family because his sister Clara had married, wasn't at home anymore. So he went from being an only child to being one of 9, and it was a little bit of a shock for him. They didn't have a lot. They lived along the tracks in Mandan, right by the bridge that on the end of town. That house was later moved. It's near St. Joe's Church now. But he quit high school, actually, and joined the Navy during World War II. He was in the Pacific. I did not know that he was actually in Japan after the war until we were going through some of his old pictures that we as children had never seen. And there was Japanese writing and whatnot in the background. But he didn't talk a whole lot about it, as was somewhat typical of many of our servicemen and women. But he always said that he was the right-hand man to the admiral, and I always teased him that the admiral was left-handed. So we used to laugh about that. That was one of our jokes. Dad worked on the railroad, as did his father. He started out as a brakeman, ended up as conductor. Remember the phone ringing all times of the day or night. He might get a phone call at 3 a.m. to report to duty over in Mandan. We lived in Bismarck here. But anyway, Mom and Dad, my mom was Eileen Fortune. Dad met her they were in a wedding together. They were paired up, and it was kind of interesting. There were 3 bridesmaids, 3 groomsmen. Those 3 ended up getting, the couples ended up getting married, and the bride and groom for whom they were serving ended up getting divorced. And the other 3 couples lasted till death do them part. But that's how they met.
I come from a family of 7 children. My parents were George and Margaret Seaworth. My mom was a Fortune who grew up in Bismarck. My dad was born in Illinois, and they moved to North Dakota when he was 5 years old, and he grew up in a small town called Calvin up near the Canadian border. There's only a handful of people that still live there. He came to Bismarck after graduating from UND with a degree in civil engineering, and there was some people who hooked him up with, that's probably not the right word to use in today's, but introduced him to my mom, and so they courted for several years because it was in the midst of the Depression. 1935, and my mother was one of the older ones in the family, and she had a job, and so the family depended on her paycheck, and so my dad was willing to wait, and they were married in 1941 in San Francisco, and then the World War II broke out, of course, that year, and my dad was in the Army Reserve, so he was off to the European theater. My mom was pregnant.
Mom would talk about, she was very, very proud of being Irish, and I'm pleased that I am half Irish also. We didn't know that much about the German side. Dad didn't talk a whole lot about his stepmother when we were growing up. I can remember they're coming over to the house, and we lived for the first 9 years of my life, we lived in the basement apartment at my Irish grandparents' home. And Dad worked on the railroad, so he was gone a lot. And if Mom needed anything, Grandma was upstairs, and a variety of uncles and my aunt. And she always had some sort of help if she needed it. But we used to tease her that she was a misfortune till she married Dad. But at any rate, there was always a lot of laughter in the house, a lot of silliness, if you want to think of it in those terms. She was proud of being Irish. We would celebrate St. Patrick's Day. In fact, I can remember coming upstairs to where my grandmother and an aunt were living and showing them that I had green in my skirt for St. Patrick's Day. And my Aunt Rosalie said, "You go downstairs and take that thing off. It also has orange." You don't wear orange on St. Patrick's Day, I found out as about a third grader. So I had to get a skirt that just had green in it as opposed to one that had green and orange in it.
Tom and Bridget Fortune are an example of what we know as the American dream. I think when they left Ireland, they left because life was very hard there. And so they came looking for opportunity. And I think they were able to find it in Bismarck. I think that you know, the different jobs that Thomas Fortune did, and I'm sure Bridget, you know, raising the kids and doing seamstress work or whatever. I think they did what they had to do, and there was opportunity here. And it'd be nice if they were remembered as some of the early people who came with not much and made something through hard work and the opportunities that were here, because it was a new place and there was things that needed to be done, and they were able to find a way to do some of those things. I think that the rest of the family is very proud of the fact that they had a role in getting things started here.
Help tell the stories of Bismarck's past and become a financial sponsor of this program. Contact info@bismarckhistory.org to learn more.
I asked Pa, I said, "What do you think, Riverwood, Pa? Do you think that'd be a good name?" So I submitted that name and I won it.
Remember when the Capitol burned, I looked out and there was this black stuff going by the window.
The president of Woolworth at the time's name was Kirkwood.
My parents decided, I think my mom decided, that Bismarck needed a zoo. So